Okay, good afternoon, Poetry Africa. We are here, myself, Rashay Kister, and then also Jim, Pasquale, Augustine, and Sipokazi Jonas, and we are going to be discussing things that must fall. So let me just give you a brief introduction to my fellow poets this afternoon. Jim Pasquale Augustine writes and translates poetry in Filipino and English. He grew up in Manila in the Philippines during the Marcos dictatorship. He has since moved to Cape Town, and his early poetry books include Beneath an Angry Star. And also in 2011, the University of Santo Thomas Publishing House in Manila launched two of his new poetry books. So welcome, Jim. It's so great to see you. I haven't seen you in a while. Yes, it's great to have you here at Poetry Africa and also in Durban. And then I have another love with me, Sipokazi Jonas. And Sipokazi Jonas is a playwright, she's a performer and a producer. She holds an MA in English literature as well as an undergraduate degree in drama and English. And while Sipokazi's bio is very long, but I think the important things to know is that for a recent play that she was working on with two other wonderful individual women performers, they won a SAFTA award. The title of the play is called We Are Dying Here. And then in addition to that, you got some great news last night, friend. The Cultural Awards in Cape Town honored you as the young innovative artist. So you won that award as well. You're just scooping up awards all over.
Congratulations.
It's all by accident. It's all by accident.
And just for everybody out there, I'm Rashay Kister. I'm originally from Cape Town. I now reside in Johannesburg. I have been in poetry for quite some time as a curator, organizer, but also as the poet myself. Been published in various anthologies and also not just poetry anthologies, but also short story anthologies. And we are here, we are within. And so I think let's just kick off the conversation. I think, Jim, I want to frame the conversation around your experience, particularly in the Philippines, and what it meant during that Marcos dictatorship and what it looked like in terms of political change that happened in your country. Maybe you can just speak to us a bit about that.
Okay. Hi. Thanks, everyone. First of all, I was in the Philippines as a little kid under martial law. So as a kid, you just accept things. You don't question anything. You just see things and you just accept them as they are. So I didn't know that we had curfews until we were told, okay, go back in the house now because it's getting dark. And apparently, that's all we got told. But after 11 o'clock or midnight, I think, anyone who's on the streets gets arrested, gets thrown into jail. That's one thing I only learned after when I was much older. And then you can't comment on anything about the government that's negative. There was one actor, he was a comedian. He made fun of the slogan of the Marcos regime. It had to do with, how did it go again? Something about progress. This is what's needed for progress. Okay. Instead of the slogan, he said, what's needed is bicycles. So the regime ordered him to ride the bicycle around the city for, I think, 24 hours. Okay, that sort of thing was what was happening at that time. So you cannot comment on anything about the government that's negative. So and
really
as
an unusual punishment, like
yeah,
like political commentary, and now you're forced to exercise around.
Yeah, it gets worse. It got worse. There's the daughter. She was the representative for youth, and then a student asked her, "Why are you the representative for youth? Just because you're the daughter of the president?" And she was so annoyed by this, she basically ordered her bodyguards to take this guy and then he disappeared, and the next time he was seen, he was dead. And she was actually convicted in the States when they fled to Hawaii. She was convicted, and she was ordered to pay the family of this student for having him murdered because of commenting at her, you know. And she said, "Well, it's none of your business. So what if I ordered his murder, his death? You know, it's like that. It was like that, and we
Yeah,
grew up with that, and we didn't really question it much. So
yeah, and I think it's so interesting because it's just that like they're complete like you know, it is in all its facets a dictatorship, you know, like
yeah,
the entitlement of what personality means, like when you're governing a place and how you do it either with cruelty or care. And so that's a very interesting conversation. And I think also, you were speaking about being indoors at a certain time. And I mean, I think myself and Sibukazi are probably at the same age level, but it was a similar situation here in South Africa that you were prohibited to go out after certain hours. You had to carry a pass at all times. So do you have you drawn those similarities for yourself as well, Jim?
yeah. It's quite weird that dictators and people who love power will do almost the same things in any country. So they take away media rights, they take away citizens' rights, like it was nothing, And for a start, because people are scared, they have to submit to it, and it takes a while for them to actually say to themselves that this isn't right. We're not taking it. And when that starts, it just snowballs. It might take longer for other places. It might never happen, but eventually, yeah, something does happen. But what's sad about the Philippines is after the Marcoses were thrown out, there was a period of more or less democratic time and more economic boom and all that. But now he's back into power. The Marcoses are back into power because of questionable elections set up by the outgoing Duterte regime. They put the commissions and elections officers. They had everything controlled, and they fed the media with all the numbers that's unbelievable statistically, in which the international observer mission said basically it's a failed election. So those in power right now shouldn't be there, and they're the Marcoses and the Dutertes.
Yeah, that's quite scary, but it also makes one think about citizen responsibility in kind of owning a sense of justice for where you are placed and where you are situated. I mean, what does this call for then? Does it call for a coup by the people? Does it call for strategic measures of getting together to kind of then dismantle the system?
Yeah.
So I want to speak to you, Sibukazi, particularly around hashtag We Are Dying Here. And I think, one of the examples where people felt it imperative to just organize and strategize for themselves was definitely the total shutdown movement. We saw a contingency and just masses of women taking to the streets in a very organized manner throughout the country, walking to buildings of importance and handing over memorandums that speaks particularly to gender-based violence and femicide. And we know subsequently from then, policy was then created in terms of the National Strategic Plan for gender-based violence. That was the blueprint for it. And that also just speaks to the power of the people. And so from my perspective, I'd like to hear from you, in terms of the things that, besides policy, some of the barriers that was apparent in your work and that you tackled through We Are Dying Here, that you wanted to highlight as these aggressions that are sometimes overt, but then also, not as obvious in relation to women in our society.
Yeah, thank you so much, Roche. And I actually wanted to say, in relation to what Jim has mentioned, it makes, when you hear stories of fallen dictatorships and the role that people play in that, that citizens rising together, it actually makes it even more terrifying that the world is moving towards an extreme right-wing direction right now. Because again, I mean, there's a couple of countries in Europe and some elections right now that have actually shown again that you've got the same kind of mentality that's winning. Yes. You've got the same. So it's almost as if we really don't learn our lesson, and whatever drummed up kind of grievances that that people sometimes feel and that these politicians use in order to for people to feel sidelined, right? Because they no longer enjoy certain privileges. It's honestly terrifying. And I think there's also so many examples of democracy itself being a failure or not being protected as it should. And I think that, I was watching some documentary recently about the role of the media to ensure that they're not unquestioning in their reporting, right? So Jim, when you say that, they were able to feed the media these stories, and this particular documentary was actually about reporting police brutality in the US. And it was speaking about how the police departments have PR desks, and they have people that just send press releases.
That's
and
crazy.
You read the press release. So in this one policeman, is talking about how in the morning he'll write the press release, and by the evening it's in the news. And you think, how is it possible that media doesn't have the right discernment to actually ask the right questions, and to know that more often than not we're not being told the truth? So I think perhaps even as artists, if I link to the responsibility of the media, is that as artists as well, we do have a responsibility to ask questions, to speak the truth, and to say those uncomfortable things, and to question whether the information that we're receiving is really true. While on the other hand, we're also tapping into the emotions, tapping into the thinking on the ground of what it is that we as people are actually truly feeling, that isn't propaganda. And I think part of the challenge around doing the work like #We're Dying Here is that indeed we have policy, but then there's also the lack of political will, right, which is a big part of the failure around addressing gender-based violence in South Africa. There are many, many issues, there are many problems, but I think actual accountability, I remember there was a whole controversy even around parole, where perpetrators were not supposed to receive parole, but you keep seeing stories of people that are receiving parole, and obviously dockets, police dockets, and cases that are disappearing. People can just be bought off. But then also when you have the people in parliament, the people in government, or the people who are supposed to carry out and implement policy themselves are actually implicated, right? When you have that, oh, no, but this person is still in this position, but there was a video that went out that showed them actually hitting a woman in this bar, but they're still the head or deputy of something. So I think that that lack of accountability is a huge stumbling block. So that policy almost dies, and all the intentions around it die when there's no political will. And I think for us with this project and thinking about what we can say and do as artists, is really about, we had high aspirations thinking, oh, this can affect policy, this can do this. But at some point, I think we settled within the reality that it was really just about articulating and giving a language to this scourge, right? To the feelings that we have, the trauma that we carry with us, and that we move through in the world, to question the systems and the structures that actually keep those problematic gender dynamics and power dynamics that enable this kind of abuse to continue, problematic language, all of those things, to actually address them, knowing that our target is really the audience. We're hoping, we're fortunate and some important person sees it and can start making change where they are, but it's really about within our space. So just as an example, we screened it at a school in Cape Town, and because of that, they decided to start a support group for their kids, right, at the high school, to actually, because they obviously heard a lot of stories and they've got this wellness department. So now they've started a support group that students could join. But also it was seen, one of the students there told their parent, and that parent is the head of wellness for a college. And so now the film is going to be screened to something like 20,000 college students yes, it's wonderful, at the end of this month. And I think it's really those particular moments where sort of almost word of mouth, passing it on from one person to the other, and then having the feedback from the student body on what they think should be happening on campus. Yeah, that's I think some of the ways, those are some of the ways in which we're trying to overcome those barriers. But I've kind of really started managing my own expectations, whether or not the people who are meant to make the institutional change are willing to do so.
Yeah. So I just think a few things from what you've said. I've worked in politics before, and I am currently a government employee, a public servant, so to speak. And it's interesting, having worked from the one perspective of like being in the NGO sector where you are completely in opposition to the government, and then being within and, trying to understand what that means as well. But for me, in the framing of like what it means to be an artist in this time and to deliver social commentary and react to these things, there's no gray area. Injustice is injustice, either way. And I think particularly the framing of our systems as well, as much as you were saying there's no political will, but I think we always have to be cognizant of the structures that have also framed us to get to this point. I work particularly in LGBTIQA rights, and for me, a lot of people don't know this, but like being in same-sex relationships was criminalized in our country at one point. There was sodomy laws in terms of the Immorality Act. And then only at a later stage, they included lesbians because they're like, oh, lesbians don't actually need to be criminalized because, their relationships aren't even that serious, which speaks to a different kind of framing of, of what patriarchy looks like. But I mean, a lot of the way South Africa is constructed is definitely in terms of, this ideology of the family unit, what it means to preserve it in a conventional sense. And when you move away from that, you also then, you kind of poke holes in this ideology that this is what families should look like. This is what homes should look like. And so this also adds into the conversation about how patriarchy influences us in a way that is, let's say, not as apparent, because there's this undercurrent of understanding that we should, for instance, be in a particular way. And this creates large problems then, especially for queer identifying people like me, because it's like now when you're with a woman, you are completely just off the radar from that particular model, So I think there's a lot of things that feed into to preserving these notions that are actually harmful in our society, and that don't speak to progress. And one particular thing that I also wanted to mention, because it was like you were saying, this press releases by the police and, how this media functions and this right-wing thinking. And we have to be aware of the fact that as much as leftist organizations are organized and, they create strategies and tactics for change and transformation, there's a whole cohort of individuals that are also working just as hard to preserve all the nonsenses in society, and they are just as intelligent, they are just as strategic, they are also just waiting to jump on particular topics. I've seen it so many times in South African politics where a progressive bill would come out, for instance, and then you have all of these right-wing individuals just bombarding the spaces to unpack this policy so that they can poke holes in it, essentially.
Yeah.
So this is what happens. But I think in the context of that, let's hear some poems though.
Okay, can I go first? Because you said about
Yeah,
family.
absolutely, Tim.
Okay.
Go for it.
All
Go
right.
for it. Because
This
it
is
seems
this
like
is
you're excited. I'm
this
not
is
going to
the
stop you.
this is the Marcos family. Okay, this is
Okay.
from this book, the one I'm launching this year, Blood Red Dragonflies, from Deep South, Robert Barrels, Deep South. It's about the Marcos family, and everything that I'm going to read here is not made up. So it's called Face in the Tar. The dictator's son always got more than he wished. One birthday, it was a yacht and a man dressed as a baby leaping out of a giant cake. One of the dictator's daughters had a wedding entourage that rivaled Princess Diana's. The cathedral would be nothing but rubble afterwards. The other daughter could have the face of the moon if she wanted. The flick of her chin could turn a teenager into a mangled mess. The dictator's wife generously grew 1,000 feet just to please the shoes she was compelled to purchase to stamp out sadness from her carved out heart. The dictator himself could make people disappear from their homes and be found floating down a river, their heads athrob with crabs. If you questioned any of them, your face would be melted into tar to patch up the highway that bore his name. That's all facts.
Yeah, thanks for that mid-afternoon trauma, Jim. Really appreciate it. No, but I'm kidding. But it's also I think in the framing of this conversation, it means that the continuous work, and particularly now that you're saying, particularly in the Philippines, that this that these
Son,
are gaining power, this means like this
same name.
There needs to be more awareness around this. There needs to be more combative means to actually, make this regime fall again. Sibakazi, do you maybe want to bless us with some poetry?
Certainly. Thank you, Jim. I love your work, and I've loved it for a number of years. And it's just so chilling. It's so chilling. All right, let me just navigate here and find. All right, okay, here we go. The men she loved were a baptism of blue and black stones and stained windows. They were never satisfied until things rubbled. Their love made things crumble in a mosaic of accusations and apologies until she was disfigured, a cathedral of shards, an archive of bruises. But why does she not leave? Why does she live this way? Abuse trades in currencies of silence, and in a choir of Pandora's boxes with tongues embalmed to emulate speech, but the private stink is always on the brink of unraveling false sympathies passed around pews with the zeal of a collection plate. In these hallowed halls, we are taught to live as needle and thread, to sew this hurting body into hymn book seams, sing the same theme song, even if it is sung from between bruised lips. In a congregation of cannibals, the red brick road to confession and conversion is stained in the blood of women whose suffering is auctioned from the pedestal of God's will that has nothing to do with God himself. Is this not how devils worship? Desecrating temples, using God's name in veins and arteries and whispers of, shame, why does she not leave? Why does she live this way? In a room full of the smoke of prayers, there is a woman baptized by a man twisting scripture and believers full of unbelief. Give her a God she can believe in. That's from the stage version of Dying Here.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Sibukazi. I just think like when I listen to both of you, I'm just like, my my heart can really be contained in my chest because I'm just like, I need a moment. But thank you for both sharing. I think within my context, something that I really want to see for, or rather at least the narrative to change is definitely around, language in our country. And particularly, I'm so happy that I've got both two Catonians here in the room with me, because you understand the context of what it means to be like a brown and colored person in this country, because you both live there in the factory of where we are produced, so to speak. And because you always laugh at my you can't take my humor, but it's the truth though. Like the mass en masse, that's where most brown and black people, well, brown people exist that are identified as colored. And of course, there's all the problematicness with this label colored to begin with, and I feel like there was a definite co-opting by the apartheid government in usurping brown people, to use them as a tool to also further oppress, people of other tribes, Nguni tribes, Sotho tribes, etc. And for me, the one thing that saddens me horrifically in this country is that when you've got this contingency of people that is, they are a black clan, they are a tribe, but the complete erasure of the history within our country, and the narratives that are spoken about in terms of just indigenous knowledge systems in relation to this particular tribe, and also the disacknowledgement of the language that also inspires other languages in our country, and that is not even recognized. I'm talking particularly now about like Khabib languages, but then also the fact that Afrikaans in its framing has just also been always viewed as this oppressive thing, when the reality of the country is that there are more black and brown people that speak Afrikaans than there are white individuals, and this complete heist of this language that was then taken from people of color and used as a tool of oppression. And I'm always in conflict about this thing of, taking ownership of this for myself, but knowing that to other cohort of individuals, that it's hurtful, it's painful. But for me, this is the only thing that I know, this is my family language. This is how I have there's so much color in it, and the variations and the dialects that exist. White people know one version, and then black people know all the versions, and so for me, I think this is also the fact that the framing of the language and the framing of how it seems, this thing needs to fall. It needs to change. There needs to be a re-education around the history of the Western Cape, but also in particularly brown individuals in our country, colored people, and also to kind of unearth these kind of histories so that people know where they belong. So I'm going to read a poem. This is called Tung Anilong, which means tongue in the lung. And if you are colored, you would know tongue in the lung means like when you kissing someone, making out with someone, they like literally you putting your tongue in someone's lung. It's yeah. But yeah, here we go. Tongue in the lung, tongue in the lung, a deliberate way to breathe. My tongue sounds like the Transvaal fixed in dialect. By a place I've never been, never seen, it is foreign. My mouth rounds and stretches as if it had swallowed a whole farmer. That farmer, the one who owned the land where my grandfather labored. That one who stole the land in the Boerland that my uncle owned. My tongue sounds like the huisgenoot, like SABC2, like Mevrou van der Merwe, like Karen van der Merwe, like an episode of Noord vir Noord where people just didn't quite get the laid reiki. It sounds like cheesing to myself, nothing like my mother's tongue, almost like my mother's tongue, but standardized, textbook, fast-fed, too light, too heavy, too instructional to be my own. My tongue betrays my skin. My skin is enemy to my words. My words sound like triggers to 76, like laws built on Ingia Kerk sermons, like generational psychosis, like funerals. I wish my tongue a more digestible Afrikaans, an African chance to unswallow the sound of pain. If it was more Cape Flats than Free State, Vrystaat would mean something different than vermaak, for compliments from thieves who ask, hoe praat jy so mooi Afrikaans? My tongue does mean code for survival, coding to survive. But too much mandatory textbook and compulsory haven't done this tongue, my mother's tongue, a love tongue, a clan tongue, cemented in falsehood and oppression. Dit hou herinnering van gevoel, nie net woord nie, van plek maak, van belang, van self in eienskap. This tongue, my bilingual tongue, carries strangers in my mouth from places I've heard of, never been to, that walk trauma from my mouth, beyond my heart, to your ears, too well, te goed, te savor, to Afrikaans. And the crowd goes wild.
Thank you. Yes.
Oh.
We're
Okay.
the crowd. Thank you.
You are the crowd. So we do have a question. Did you want to say something, Sibukazi?
Yes, because I think technically we're co-moderating. But I kind of forgot. Yeah, I think it's really important because also, when we have the question of language in this country, I think this one is not given as much import as it should be. And I mean, it's an ongoing conversation in Cape Town, and I've seen and admire many poets and rappers and musicians, I mean, who are actually doing work that reclaims their tongue. I'm thinking about people like Namacham, I'm thinking about Jetsvenga, I'm thinking about, I mean, if you go back to the first play in Cops was at small, actually, right? I think it was Kana Ekois too. And there's actually a body of work that has been produced, but I don't really see the conversation, as you said, I guess maybe because Western Cape is like the factory, but I'm not seeing a lot of like Access Park type, the factory being exported to have this conversation as much in other parts of the country. And I think it's actually really important when it comes to identity in South Africa, because that ownership of white people claiming to own Afrikaans, and then kind of having that demarcation of Kombai style is kind of there's a power thing that's ongoing there. And I think I really love how your work actually brings that to the fore consistently. And I mean, I know that because I relate, especially because I have some of my own conversations and questions around English and this Xhosa. And so I think I'd just love to hear more and see more of it happening. And I think it actually fits the question that you're going to ask that we have from Facebook. And maybe that could segue into sharing some more poems.
Absolutely. So I just wanted to say, the Western Cape is this containment, but then also in the Northern Cape, the culture there in relation to brown individuals is just on another level. They've got what we call the real dance there, which is a very sacred kind of dance that is indigenous to brown people, and it's used as a traditional practice, and kids get taught this real dance throughout their lives, but also the containment of Afrikaans and the dialect that exists there, and the geographic space between Namibia and the Northern Cape as well is also a different conversation. So I think, it's definitely worth thinking about how you kind of mainstream this narrative throughout the country. So thank you for that, Sibukazi. So speaking to the question that we got from Facebook, so Gigi Gonal says, so many issues, social inequality, GBV, abuse of power, disinformation must fall. So I'll put this to both of you. What is the role of poets in the fallalism movement? So maybe we can start with you, Jim, and then move to Sukazi, and I'll answer it myself.
Oh, personally, poets are always criticizing or looking at the world from a different perspective. So it's inevitable that they will be perceptive when there's something wrong. So they have to point it out. But we have to point it out in a creative way. Otherwise, it just falls onto the side of the road. Like, nothing, no one's gonna bother to hear you say it. So we have to come up with good poetry that will be read again and again, and people will keep getting something out of it, not just one reading. So I think that's quite a challenge for poets to look for what they can say and how to say it in the best way that will still be fresh a decade later and still be useful for someone else who might need the same perspective one day. So yeah, that's the only way I can say.
Right. So I absolutely agree with you, Jim. And I think the point about creativity is also important. I think, when we have we have a very solid history of protest poetry in South Africa. And I think when, the issue of context and time is actually quite an interesting one, right? Because it's sometimes work can be so sort of almost like overly specific and so located within its time that it doesn't really carry beyond that. And I think we end up studying that work as kind of a historical artifact. Like it's difficult to read the present into it. And I think some of the poems that were really powerful, and they were performed in rallies, they were performed sort of union gatherings and in town halls, maybe doesn't carry that same energy and that same impact perhaps in the present moment. But I think it's still really, really important to study and to understand our own traditions, our own forms that are affected by or influenced by that history. We've got, protest theater, protest drama, music has, for me anyway, this is not an academic how do I put it? Yeah, this is not, I'm not an expert on this, but I feel like music has been able to continue in South Africa. Music has kind of had those multiple lives. So when our work can exist and can still speak decades later, I think that's a really powerful thing. So I agree. We can't be in cahoots. We have to challenge, and we have to ask questions of ourselves and our own positions and because falling itself is not new. And I don't think maybe anyone questions that. That's an ongoing thing. But what's important is also knowing who are the voices that speak when in that protest. It's like we need to have hyper awareness, because as Roche said, we had that happen with Thieves Must Fall, where you saw quite a number of young women, a number of queer people that were in the lead in the beginning, but then it soon was reworked and people started getting political position. I'm not even going to go into that too much, but the narrative shifted, and again, was sort of men were the ones that were credited with doing that work, whereas in that was not actually the case. And we've seen that with hashtags like #MeToo, #Black Lives Matter, where the people who've been doing the work leading up to those hashtags, again, are sidelined or it's just co-opted and hijacked by other parties with nefarious intention.
Yeah, and it's so wild that it happens, right? Because it's like, yeah, we've got problems. But I want to say, and particularly what you're speaking about, protest poetry, one of the things that touches me the most is that James Matthew and Gladys Thomas, they produced this poetry anthology called Cry Rage during the apartheid era, and like the government banned the book, and it's just like, to me, it's like, how powerful is literature that you have to ban the whole book. Like, if people read this, this is going to be a tool to like overthrow the government. That is in essence what they were, what the subtext of that says, you know, that this is the machinery, or this is a tool to literally unravel people to the point that it's dangerous. And I think when I think about that concept, that's how I feel about poetry in general. You know, there's something about this art form, and I think it's because it's so concise, because it's so emotional, and so deliberate, that it also just changes the heart space. You know, you kind of I feel like you kind of shift, just by listening to poetry. Something inside you shifts. And, you know, whether that be an empathetic imagination, whether it be a form of compassion, whether it be, you know, the anger of the poet itself, but the emotiveness in what is presented kind of just also moves you. And so I think with that responsibility, you know, that kind of power for poets, you know, there is a responsibility to be like, how are you going to use this tool? What are you going to be using it for? You know, are you going to be out here witchcrafting everybody? Are you going to be out here, you know, infiltrating a patriarchal narrative? Are you going to be out here being homophobic? Are you going to be out here being rape apologist? Or are you going to frame things in a different way that speaks to the betterment and the healing work of our society that our society needs? So I think that's definitely the role. For me, the role of the poet is to shift things positively, you know, and to change minds in a way that makes us think more intently about healing, you know, our society, but ourselves as well. Specifically in this milieu of South Africa, we know we are a traumatized nation. Okay, maybe other people don't know, but I know we are a traumatized nation. You know, we traumatize y'all. So Jim, with that said, please.
Can I read two poems? They're sort of linked.
Okay.
This is because the book that Kwaz actually wanted to discuss is how to make a Salagubang helicopter. Okay, this book is largely anti-Duterte. He was the president in the past 6 years, and his policy was to kill anyone who's into drugs, except those who are rich or who are his friends or supplying the drugs to the country. So I'm going to read you one called Escape, which is more personal, and the next one is called Danica May. Escape. The day I visited my nephew at rehab, there were people screaming. One of the patients had bolted when he saw the gate open. My sister told me to stay in the vehicle until it was safe. They caught the guy, beat him up a bit. Solitary was definite. My sister unwrapped the food she packed for all to share, as if nothing else was more ordinary. The trees gave some shade that humid afternoon. My nephew said he'd like to come home again. All of us knew it wasn't time, but spoke of days before everything went dark. Strips of garbage bags fluttered on the barbed wire that coiled along the top of the walls of the compound. The voices of children playing on the other side came through, shrill. It was hard to tell if they were having fun or being attacked. The next poem is called Danica May. Danica May is one of the youngest victims of the war on drugs by Duterte. She was with her grandfather, and the grandfather was being arrested by the police, and they shot him, but she was next to him and she died. Danica May. The president's helicopter will never land near your barangay. He will never walk up to your mother's house, dust his shoes off before stepping through the door. He'll never look around where you kept your toys. His eyes won't linger on your clothes as they hang or lay folded, now separate from the family laundry. He won't ask what your favorite ice cream flavor was, or how you held a crayon in your hand, or whether you covered your mouth whenever you laughed. Whatever I say won't matter, not to you, not even as I declare that bullets did not end your life. Words did. The bullets were nothing but bits of metal that could have been a door to your toy car or the buttons of a dress you will never now wear.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Jim. Actually, can I cheat here and ask Jim to read 2 more poems? Please. I mean, we've been performing since Joburg. It's an international poetry festival, and it's just great. Yeah, I'd love to hear more. Maybe I'm just being selfish and wanting to hear more, but I'd love to hear 2 more, and then I'll read one.
I'll read from this other book, Crocodiles in Belfast. Okay, I just need to find the page 31. This is about something in South Africa, not Ireland. So, Crocodiles in Belfast. The morning radio reports another crocodile attacked a woman in Belfast. She was washing a bucket to be filled with river water to carry back home. 2 other women, armed with buckets, were around. They screamed and clattered the hollow plastics, swung them against the crocodile's sides until it released the woman's leg. Annoyed, it withdrew to a quieter part of the river to wait in silence for another meal. The news will soon be forgotten before the woman's leg heals, but she will be going back to the river's edge while the drought extends its grip on the land and the men of the village go in search for work elsewhere in Pumalanga. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jim. I'm going to read a poem from Amagama Ganokutela, our multidisciplinary project, which is a historical reimagination and excavation of the story of Nokutela Mdima Dube, a significant South African woman who had a great impact on the history of the country, who's the first wife of the first president of the ANC. She was born, I believe, in 1873 and passed in 1917. She co-founded Ilanga Natal, which is a newspaper that's still available today in KZN. She co-founded Ohlange High School, which is also still running. She and her students who are fundraising for the school popularized what is now the national anthem, which is Nkosi Sikelel' Afrika. And yet, despite all of her contributions to the country and her extensive travels, she is not acknowledged for that work. She has been erased from history, erased from the very gates of the school that she co-founded, the newspaper that she co-founded never published about her. And so we've created this multidisciplinary project as a sort of historical excavation. And I'm going to read one of the poems from the short film in that project. Oh, and she attended Inanda Seminary School, which we went to yesterday as part of the festival. She's really awesome. We called for you by name in the valley of Inanda. We have come to see Unokutela Mdima, but the gates did not answer. We called again, louder. We are women. We know what it is not to be heard until you have repeated yourself or stripped and screamed and burned. We shouted until the syllables of your name rumbled between the trees, echoed the refrain down the same pathways where you pursued scriptures and ways of living between tradition and new religion. We called to the rocks to remember the songs you composed in your head before you would learn to arrange them on a page and on key. We call to the living to remember you before a man converted your last name, inherited from another man with his, before your display across the ocean under a missionary name. We came to see you, but the air was heavy with forgetting. Walls and windows whitewashed, records revised or written out as if you were never here, blazing eyes and mind training to show the world something new and mission ready. Perhaps history is not made on the end of a needle and thread, or in the kitchen, or under a broom and garden spade. Perhaps history is not made in the places where girls and women spend their lives making the things we cannot live without. Perhaps practicing to play house, mothering dolls, then never having children makes Nokutela a bad wife. Women must secure their memory through their wombs and their husbands or be forgotten. Women only support and nurture the men who shape history, never build it or make it themselves, hardly exist until they are married, die alone if divorced, while their husbands are sanitized into sainthood, towering atlases who bear the world on their shoulders. Perhaps history and truth do not mean the same thing. Perhaps memory is framing, and we must own. We have come to see Unokutela Mtima.
Thank you so much, Sibukazi. I think, in the way that you framed it, it's like the history of contributions of women in so many movements around the world. That's definitely something that we need to take into cognizance, but then also just like as a Black and marginalized populace, what it means to also experience that kind of erasure with occupying space in the world. So I'm just like, yeah. Okay, so we've got 4 minutes left. I think what I'm going to do one poem, and I think it kind of just speaks to that very question that Gigi had asked about, what is the poet's role in making things fall? So this is Let the Poet Speak. Shh, quiet, listen. And let the poet speak, please, and ease your fears. Let the poet speak and enlighten your mind. Let the poet speak and watch your soul rise effortlessly like it was always meant to do. Armed with nothing but words, the poet navigates this world with sound and rhythm, stomping metaphors and similes, unearthing sacred verses you never dreamed to exist. Resist if you must, you there in that dark room. Your only wish is entertainment, but if you open yourself, you'll find an arrangement of things you already know. Prose now becoming poems, replanting seeds already sown, constructed for you by the poet to help your spirit grow. Let the poet speak, and as your heartbeat mimics the content, pulses the history, merges with your energy, embraces your being, praise the poet for their work and their meaning, like the ancient soothsayers of yesteryear, where crowds gathered to decipher, to denote, and uncode the wisdom imparted from their lips. Let the poet speak, but not in vain. Reflect, respect, and understand their pain, their hopes, their dreams, their need to stand nakedly in front of you, reciting to you things that they just have to say, hurts that have come their way, that bled and lay internally until they are staged for you. Let the poet know you agree or you disagree. Indicate that you've cognized their rhyme, their art, their time in crafting and drafting each sentence to share with you a poem that's just so pressing. If left inside, it would fester and the poet would surely die. Let the poet speak and see nations rise to their feet. An army clad in harmony, protesters upholding banners that read down with hatred and division. Hear the poet out when you're dealing with loss. That private place that only you, God, and the poet knows. Let the poet reassure you that it will be all right, that when your world plummets and falls, just hold yourself tight to make it right. Let the poet right that wrong, and perhaps not presently, but as time suspends, your hurt will too, replaying continuously, repetitively, the poet's words to you. Let the poet remind you what it's like to be in love, providing those delicate images, those blissful ideologies, the belief in second possibilities. Let the poet's words dance in your joy, arc at the corners of your mouth, recounting the preciousness of your life. Let the poet speak, But dear poet, when they let you speak and tweak their minds, be wary that your words can ignite or spite, heal or deride with every word you recite. If you are the poet, honor the privilege, the platform, the hour. Devour each passing moment they let you speak, eating their time like your last meal. Intend to let them feel the best way you can, for you are the poet, and though they may not know it, they were always waiting to hear you speak. And the crowd goes wild. So thank you so much, Jim and Tipokazi. It was wonderful sharing space with you. I think we covered a lot. I think I've also just gained new insights into your writing as well, and your thinking behind producing the work that you've done. And yeah, I think let's continue to ensure that all the nonsenses fall. And we'd like to just say thank you to Poetry Africa for allowing us to give on this platform. And hopefully people can come to the theatre this evening in Durban, and we'll be watching Jim on stage. So thank you so much. I don't know if there's any last words from either of you two.
No, just yeah, enjoy poetry.
Okay, you covered. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. And yeah, thanks for tuning in.